Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth session of Fundraising is for Everyone. Thank you all again for joining us, and happy September, which is weird to say, but we're in September. My name is Sian, and I am CAM's Community Engagement Manager. Again, thank you all for joining us today for making your case. As we begin today's event, we want to acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. California is home to over 150 tribes, and an acknowledgement is just one step towards working with Native communities to build meaningful relationships. Museums and many institutions were founded upon purposeful exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples and still benefit from settler colonialism and associated harms. CAM is committed to moving beyond land acknowledgements and into action. We encourage you to learn more about the tribes in your area and find ways to celebrate and support them. I'm going to pop nativeland.ca in the chat for you all. It is a helpful but not definitive resource to help you learn more about the tribes in your area. And before we move into today's session, per usual, we're going to go over some housekeeping. Just a reminder, this workshop is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube page. You will all receive a link via email once it is uploaded. Our workshops are a space for learning and collaboration. We ask that you respect yourself and others here in the room. Again, the chat box will be open throughout the session. You're welcome to interact with folks in the group. You're also going to be able to unmute yourself and talk throughout the session today. And lastly, live captioning is available, and I will pop that link in the chat for you all also. And just a quick reminder, if you'd like to ask an anonymous question, you can go ahead and send it to me, and I will ask the question on your behalf. If you have any technical issues, you are welcome to message me directly in the chat box, or you can send me an email at engagement@calmuseums.org. I will do my very best to respond to your email. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jill. Jill, the floor is yours.
So today's our last day together. It's kind of hard to believe, but this is our fourth and final part of this series. And as a result, I'm going to try to cram in a lot of stuff. So first, let's have a grounding moment. I know it was like a long weekend, so this is kind of like a Monday, which is a hard day to do something like this. I understand, but I want everyone to remember, why are you here? Why do you do this? What is your why? What is your mission statement? Go to this place, make it a habit to go to this place and remember why your missions and visions matter. I think grounding ourselves is like a continual part of fundraising. So take a moment, think about that before I force this into this crazy hour or so. Thank you. So there's basically three things that I'm going to try to cover today. And they are around case making your case. It's around pitching, and it's around storytelling. All of these things overlap, they all intersect, but I'm going to start with case making. Now, like many things we've talked about in this workshop, there are a lot of different definitions of these things. So I put up a definition here that I use for my own work, and I'll just read it out loud. A case statement or a case for support is your organization's story distilled into one relatively succinct document. It shows prospective supporters who you are and what your impact is, as well as how a prospective supporter can be a part of your work and how their support will drive that impact. So I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but I was like, there's a lot of things I would actually say that a case is. I was thinking about this too. Like, why does this even matter? But I think when I really got to the nut of it, to me, the reason why a case statement or a case for support is important is because it's what's showing your relevance in the world. It is much easier to fundraise when you know your relevance, and obviously when other people know your relevance. Times change, circumstances change, politics change, people change, but what is your relevance in this moment counts for a lot. Can we go to the next slide? So for me, the way my brain works is I love to create outlines. If I just saw the definition I saw on a case statement, I'd just be like, oh God, that sounds horrible. I have to write that thing. I have to develop this thing. Ugh, that's a mouthful. So what I do is I break down a case for support into an outline. And this is the outline that I've been using for a while. I've fundraised for a long time. And these are the things that I think come up the most often when I'm drafting these things. So some of these things you'll know like the back of your hand, your mission, your vision. Like these things do not change that much. But the rest of these things, your why now, your priorities, your programs or project details, impact stories, testimonials, any visuals you have, and the actual call to action, these might change. And why do you think these things might change? One of the things I talked about early on in our workshop was how important audience is. You might have different case statements for different audiences. The case statement, even though it's something that I think should always be within an organization, depending on who this is going in front of, it should definitely change. Your organization might have a initiative that is temporary. For example, museums have exhibits that usually don't stay around forever. Maybe you want to get that in front of a funder. I am sure this is going to end up in front of different types of people. So again, just remember all the time, like who your audience is makes a big difference, and your case support can change depending on that. One of the things I do, very practically speaking, is I develop this outline, and then I have different documents for different kinds of audience. So I can kind of like swap things in just to make my life easier. So let's say I'm trying to get in front of, I don't know, a major donor. I might have a template that has a lot of this filled in, but changes because I'm going in front of a major donor. Or maybe it's an institutional funder, then I might shift things again, and I'll just have another document that is like institutionally funder focused, and then I'll swap things in. The other thing is, not everyone's going to get this just like this, right? This might just be like a guide that you have, but nevertheless, it's really helpful in your preparation for any meeting, proposal, et cetera, that you might have. Another thing that I like to do when I'm working on a case for support is I might start it off if I'm like, let's say, the director of development, but I think it's more robust to do with others. So whether or not you have a paid team or not, whether your team is board members, volunteers, staff, it's helpful to bring other people into this work if you can, because everyone has a very different perspective on like what's going to matter to them, for example, and having others there to help point out holes, point out things that are really strong, point out things that are not, can be really helpful in developing a really robust case for support. It is a living document, and it should absolutely shift over time. Okay. I'm going to move us along to pitching because I'm going to try to get through as much as I can. All right. So the pitch is something that I think when most people think of like, what do I do during my day? I think most people think what I do all day is pitch. I think the reality is that is not what most fundraisers spend most of their days on. But I do think when you are developing things like a case statement, that's a great place to start when you start thinking about a pitch. So for anyone that has or has not done this, my definition of a pitch is it's a short statement that explains what a nonprofit organization does, the problem it solves, and why its work is relevant in this moment. The goal of a pitch is to grab the listener's attention and make them want to learn, do, and hopefully give more. So a pitch is a much shorter, I wouldn't even necessarily call it a document. A pitch is a very short statement, basically. The case for support might actually be like a page long thing that you have in your files that you tap into throughout the work you do. The pitch is the thing that you are telling someone. And if you've ever talked to anyone, you know that people don't have a very long attention span. So I think one of the things I would say about the actual pitching is that when I have been tasked with making an ask, there is almost a pre-ask. I've been on the phone with this donor. I've been in contact with them. I've been in relationship with them. And before I get to the actual face-to-face ask, which it usually is, I have already told them something like, hi, we've been in touch. I see your support. You've done really great things with our organization. We really appreciate it. I would love to talk to you at greater length about how to get further involved or get further invested or something like that, depending on how the donor is. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee, lunch, whatever it is that is the most appropriate? So in general, it's pretty explicit at that point that the person on the other side of this knows an ask is coming. And I will have to say that a lot of my asks after that pre-conversation, they've just been like, okay, so here's a check. Because they know what this is all about. And in general, with fundraising, the more explicit and direct is better. Like, don't make your donor guess. That's not very kind. So you're going to be in contact. You're going to have a relationship, hopefully, with this potential donor. And you're going to already have this thing planted. If they do not offer it right off the bat, I say you make it very specific. You might share a little bit about like what's going on. You know, you're not going to like sit down and be like, so can I ask for $5,000? You know, like you're still going to be nice and like warm and like bring them into where the organization is now. These tips that are currently on the screen are the kinds of things that I would use to guide the conversation some. But I would make it very specific. You can do it at the beginning or end, really. Depends on kind of how the flow of the meeting is. But one thing I would also be really clear on is depending on who you're talking to, I tend to have a number in mind. So presumably I've done some research. I kind of know the capacity of this person, and I'm going to ask them, would you be willing to make $1,000 gift, for example? For others, it might be, are you willing to upgrade your gift to a larger amount this year? Which is a lot more vague and open. But only you can really make that decision depending on your relationship and like the research you've done on that person too. But I would just say, like, make it specific, make it direct. But most people, if they're sitting down with you, they know what's happening. So you've done a great job cultivating a relationship. You're now in this meeting with this donor or potential donor. When you have this person's attention and time, I'm going to really highlight that first bullet, which is to build in pauses. The first time I made an ask, I was scared to death. I did not really know what I was doing. And it was like, I could not stop talking. Like, I just went. And I don't think I stopped talking. I don't even know if I was breathing, really. But I was just going. And the donor is just sitting there like, Like did not even give the person a chance to respond. But I was nervous. I was super nervous. I was like 27 or something. I was a baby. Um, and the first feedback I got from my boss, who was also in the room with me, was like, that was like verbal vomit. You really need to, one, slow down, and two, give the person a chance to respond in any which way or form. Because the reality is, even if you don't know the answer to the question, you want to know what's on their mind. Like you need to know this donor. You need to know what's going on in their head so that you can follow up with them, so you can better know them, so you can better sculpt asks down the line. So build in pauses. Even if in your head you're like, oh my God, I just paused for like 3 minutes, it probably isn't as long as you think. So definitely give breathing room to the conversation. And you can even ask, do you have any questions? If you really need that in there, you can ask that too. I tend to be very direct, so I like to define the problem once again for the donor. We often assume that we're all on the same page when we are not. So I like to go in there with some sort of framing and saying, like, this is what we're dealing with. We are dealing with the demise of democracy. We are dealing with unhoused people that are at a rate that we have never seen before. We are dealing with hunger insecurity that has grown since the pandemic. Frame it specifically as much as you can so that you're on the same page. And even if you aren't entering the conversation on the same page, at least you have a baseline. Explain your solution, explain the impact. Stories and data are your friend here. I like to have a little bit of both in my back pocket. And when I do research and when I'm like prepping for these conversations, I always try to remember there's stories and there's data, and different things are going to speak to different people in different ways. It's great to have a little bit of both in your back pocket. I don't think anyone expects us to be encyclopedias, but it's good research to have in the back of your head. Know your audience. We've already been over that. No jargon, no acronyms. This is like a really important thing. When I worked in affordable housing, I have never dealt with so many acronyms in all my life. And I was constantly having to boil down these things that people were saying around the office. Don't expect that anyone knows anything about what you're saying. Put it into layperson language as much as you can. And if you need to practice with people, do that beforehand, not while you're in this and you're like, oh my God, how do I say this thing, this technical thing that no one else talks about? So definitely boil the jargon out of your mental space. I am a big practicer. I like to practice beforehand, and I like to practice on different types of people. So I think it's always nice to practice with people around your office, but definitely take some time to practice with people that are outside of your realm. My poor husband has had to hear me do fake pitches 1.5 million times. He's a scientist. He doesn't know anything about what I'm talking about for the most part. So I practice on someone like him. I practice on family members. I practice on anyone who will give me the time of day. It will really help you not only feel more comfortable, but they will also be able to be like, I don't know what you just said. And they can hopefully say it in a way that you won't be offended when they're like, what? You don't know what I just said? So practice on as many different types of people as you can. Like I said before, I would include a very clear ask and call to action. And I mentioned the call to action because there's also going to be times when you're in meetings that you're not asking for money necessarily. It might be that you want a new board member. It might mean that you need a new honorary committee member. I don't know. I don't have any idea of what you might be in need of, but make sure you make it very clear. Some of these things will overlap, but different kinds of asks are big supports to an organization. So be really clear on that. Knowing and sharing your next steps is really important. So you're getting towards the end of your conversation with this potential supporter. And at some point, you should say something like, "Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I will be getting back to you within the week with what we can do next." Just saying that out loud and then doing it builds your credibility. Thank everyone. This is really important. So much of fundraising is just thanking people. Thank them face to face. Send them a thank you note after the meeting too. We're going to go into storytelling. So I think it's impossible to talk about fundraising without talking about storytelling. Everybody's been told the power of storytelling. And one of the things that I think is really important to note is that not only is storytelling effective, but I think it's also one of the most equitable strategies in the business. We talked a bit about equity at the beginning of this workshop, but unlike a lot of other things in this work, everyone has a story to tell, right? So that is powerful on all levels of this work. I'm going to just read a couple quotes because I know that when I was learning this, these are some of the quotes that stuck with me. So stories allow us to simulate intense experience without having to actually live through them. You can go to the next slide, actually, Tiana. Another quote that has stuck with me is, "A story is the only way to activate parts in the brain so that a listener turns the story into their own idea and experience." One last one, which is really long, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. You can go to the next slide. I'll just ask everyone to just like read it through real quick. So storytelling is like our best friend here. It's effective, it's scientific, it's equitable. Use storytelling. So can you raise your hand if you have ever cried during a Pixar movie? um, many people in my family like to talk about the fact that I don't really cry. I think something's wrong with my tear ducts or something. Like I just don't cry that much. But I watched Coco and I bawled. I bawled like a baby. Oh my God, I was a mess. There is something about Pixar movies. I have long thought of Pixar as like one of the most important storytellers of our modern day. And I think it's for all types of reasons, right? If I ask you to think about a Pixar movie you watched, for one, you could probably share something specific about it. But two, you'd probably attach some emotion to it. And that's like super powerful. So I bring up Pixar because there is something I learned about a while ago called the story spine. And this is supposedly one of Pixar's tactics they use for their storytelling. And if you look at the slide, this is basically what the framework is. So in every Pixar movie, you can probably say once upon a time, some kind of context, and every day, something, and you get the idea. So let's see. Can you go to actually? A second. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is one way to look at Stripe is like a payment processing thing, but it's using the story spine to develop a pitch in this case, Stripe is a tech company, but they also have to go out for funding. And they took the story spine framework into a pitch. Can everyone read it? I realize the type is kind of small. But yeah, go ahead and just read it real quick so you get an idea of what I'm talking about here. So to go back to Pixar, I found an example of Finding Nemo using the story spine. I'm assuming most of us are at least somewhat familiar with Finding Nemo. So, applied to this movie, once upon a time, there was a fish named Marlin that was protective of his son, Nemo. And every day, he warned Nemo that the ocean was full of danger. Until one day, to rebel against his dad, Nemo ignored the warnings and swam into the ocean. And because of this, he was captured by a diver and ended up in a dentist's fish tank. And because of this, Marlin enlisted other sea creatures to go and rescue Nemo. Until finally, he found Nemo and learned that love depends on trust. And why we use something like a story spine is because it helps develop a story's main structure. At the end of the day, you have to create a story structure to tell a story. I, on a very practical note, I love this story spine because sometimes our creativity is just not there. I know that I've been in a place where I was like, oh my God, I have so much to do. And now I need to think of a story to tell this donor, and my creativity is gone. So using something like this can be really helpful and just to get like your brain moving in that kind of way. I find that when I'm tapped, it's really easy to go into like the data points and get very, I don't know, almost like scientific. But fundraising requires emotion, and storytelling is a great way to bring that out. So I go to this template sometimes as a way to like, okay, how am I going to tell the story of my organization to this donor? And I just start plugging things in to try it out.